this privilege. Jesus does not think that they all must do the same in carrying out the preaching work that he has charged them to do. As illustrated, each should do all that he can according to his own ability. This by no means implies that Jesus will be pleased if one is sluggish and fails to do his best in promoting the Master's belongings. How pleased the apostles must be, though, with the assurance, to everyone who has, more will be given. Jesus gives the illustration of the talents in the illustration of the talents, who is like the master, and who are like the slaves. What lessons does Jesus teach his disciples? 113, 263. On the Mount of Olives, Jesus has just related the illustrations of the 10 virgins and of the talents. How does he end his answer to the apostles' question regarding the sign of his presence and of the conclusion of the system of things? He does so with a final illustration, one about sheep and goats. Jesus begins by establishing its setting, telling them, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit down on his glorious throne. Matthew 25:31. He leaves no doubt that he, Jesus, is the central figure in this illustration. He often called himself the Son of Man. Matthew 8:20, 9, 6, 20, 18, 28. When will this illustration find fulfillment? It is when Jesus comes in his glory with the angels and sits down on his glorious throne. He had already spoken about the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory and with his angels. When would that be? Immediately after the tribulation. Matthew 24, 29-31. Mark 13, 26, 27. Luke 21, 27. So this illustration is to find fulfillment at Jesus' future coming in glory. What will he then do? Jesus explains. When the Son of Man comes, all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Matthew 25, 31-33. Regarding the sheep, separated to the favored side, Jesus says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who have been blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the founding of the world. Christ in power judges the sheep and the goats. Matthew 25, 31-46, 264. Matthew 25, 34. Why do the sheep receive the king's favor? The king explains, I became hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you received me hospitably. Naked and you clothed me. I fell sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you visited me. When these sheep, the righteous ones, ask in what way they did those good things, he answers, to the extent that you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Matthew 25, 35, 36, 40, 46. They do not do these good deeds in heaven, for there are no sick or hungry ones there. These must be deeds done for Christ's brothers on earth. What of the goats, who are put on the left side? Jesus says, then the king will say to those on his left, go away from me, you who have been cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I became hungry, but you gave me nothing to eat. And I was thirsty, but you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, but you did not receive me hospitably. Naked, but you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, but you did not look after me. Matthew 25, 41-43. This judgment is merited because the goats failed to treat Christ's brothers on earth kindly, as they should have done. The apostles learn that this future time of judgment is to have permanent, everlasting consequences. Jesus tells them, then the king will say, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to one of these least ones, you did not do it to me. These will depart into everlasting cutting off, but the righteous ones into everlasting life. Matthew 25, 45, 46. Jesus' response to the apostles' question provides much for his followers to think about, helping them to examine their attitudes and deeds. Jesus gives the illustration of the sheep and the goats. In Jesus' illustration of the sheep and the goats, who is the king, and when is the illustration to be fulfilled? Why will the sheep be judged as meriting Jesus' favor? On what basis will some people be judged as goats, and what future will the sheep and the goats have? 114, 265. Jesus finishes teaching the 4 apostles on the Mount of Olives, answering their question about his future presence and the conclusion of the system of things. What a busy day Nisan 11 has been. It is perhaps while they are returning to Bethany for the night when Jesus tells the apostles, "You know that 2 days from now the Passover takes place, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be executed on the stake." Matthew 26. 2. Jesus apparently spends the next day, Wednesday, quietly with his apostles. On Tuesday, he had rebuked the religious leaders and exposed them publicly. They are seeking to kill him. Hence, he does not openly show himself on Nisan 12 so that nothing will prevent his celebrating the Passover with his apostles after sunset the next evening, as Nisan 14 begins. But the chief priests and the older men of the people are not remaining quiet before the Passover. They gather in the courtyard of the high priest, Caiaphas. Why? They are upset because Jesus has been exposing them. Now they conspire together to seize Jesus by cunning and to kill him. How and when will they do so? They say, "Not at the festival, so that there may not be an uproar among the people." Matthew 26. 4, 5. They are in fear because Jesus enjoys the favor of many. Meanwhile, the religious leaders receive a visitor. To their surprise, it is one of Jesus' own apostles, Judas Iscariot. Satan has implanted in him the idea of betraying his master. Judas asks them, "What will you give me to betray him to you?" Matthew 26. 15. Delighted at this, they agree to give him silver money. Luke. Jesus' final Passover approaches. Matthew 26. 1-5, 14-19. Mark 14. 1, 2, 10-16. Luke 22. 1-13, 22. 5. How much? They gladly consent to give him 30 silver pieces. It is significant that the price of a slave is 30 shekels. Exodus 21. 32. The religious leaders thus show contempt for Jesus, that he is of little value. Judas now starts looking for a good opportunity to betray him to them without a crowd around. Luke 22. 6. Nisan 13 begins at sundown Wednesday, and this is the 6th and last night Jesus spends in Bethany. The next day, final preparations will need to be made for the Passover. A lamb must be obtained so that it can be slaughtered and roasted whole after Nisan 14 begins. Where will they have the meal, and who will prepare it? Jesus has not provided such details. Thus, Judas cannot pass them on to the chief priests. Probably early Thursday afternoon, Jesus dispatches Peter and John from Bethany, saying, "Go and get the Passover ready for us to eat." They respond, "Where do you want us to get it ready?" Jesus explains, "When you enter into the city, a man carrying an earthenware water jar will meet you. Follow him into the house that he enters. And say to the landlord of the house, 'The teacher says to you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And that man will show you a large, furnished upper room. Get it ready there." Luke 22. 8-12. No doubt the landlord is a disciple of Jesus. He may anticipate Jesus' request to use his house for this occasion. When the 2 apostles get to Jerusalem, they find everything just as Jesus has told them. So they see to it that the lamb is ready and that the other arrangements for the Passover meal are in place to care for the needs of the 13. Jesus and his 12 apostles. Judas Iscariot is paid to betray Jesus. 2 apostles prepare for the Passover. What does Jesus apparently do Wednesday, Nisan 12, and why? Why do the religious leaders meet, and why does Judas go to them? Whom does Jesus send into Jerusalem on Thursday, and what do they do? 115, 267. At Jesus' direction, Peter and John have already arrived in Jerusalem to prepare for the Passover. Later Jesus and the 10 other apostles head there. It is afternoon, and the sun is sinking in the western sky as Jesus and his party descend the Mount of Olives. This is Jesus' last daytime view from here until after his resurrection. Soon Jesus and his party reach the city and make their way to the home where they will have the Passover meal. They climb the stairs to the large upper room. There they find that all preparations have been made for their private meal. Jesus has looked forward to this occasion, for he says, "I have greatly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." Luke 22:15. Many years earlier, the custom of passing a number of cups of wine among the Passover participants was introduced. Now, after accepting one of the cups, Jesus gives thanks and says, "Take this and pass it from one to the other among yourselves, for I tell you, from now on, I will not drink again from the product of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." Luke 22:17-18. It should be clear that his death is close. At some point during the Passover meal, something unusual occurs. Jesus gets up, sets aside his outer garments, and picks up a towel. Then he puts water in a basin that is at hand. Ordinarily, a host would see to it that his guests' feet were washed, perhaps by a servant. Luke 7:44. On this occasion no host is present, so Jesus performs this personal service. Any of the apostles could have taken the opportunity to do it, but not one of them does. Is it because some rivalry still exists among them? Whatever the case, they are embarrassed to have Jesus wash their feet. When Jesus comes to Peter, he protests, "You will certainly never wash my feet." Jesus replies, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Peter responds with feeling, "Lord, wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." How surprised he must be, then, at Jesus' answer. Whoever has bathed does not need to have more than his feet washed, but is completely clean. And you men are clean, but not all of you. John 13:8-10. Jesus washes the feet of all 12, including the feet of Judas Iscariot. After putting his outer garments on and reclining at the table again, teaching humility at the last Passover, Matthew 26:20, Mark 14:17, Luke 22:14-18, John 13:1-17, 268. Jesus asks, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You address me as teacher and Lord, and you are correct, for I am such. Therefore, if I, the Lord and teacher, washed your feet, you also should wash the feet of one another. For I set the pattern for you, that just as I did to you, you should also do. Most truly I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, happy you are if you do them." John 13:12-17. What a beautiful lesson in humble service. Jesus' followers should not seek the first place, thinking that they are important and should be served. Rather, they should follow Jesus' example, not by any ritual of foot washing, but by being willing to serve with humility and without partiality. Jesus eats his last Passover with the apostles. He teaches a lesson by washing the apostles' feet during the Passover meal. What does Jesus tell the apostles that indicates his death is close? Why is it unusual that Jesus washes the apostles' feet? By performing the menial service of washing his apostles' feet, what lesson is Jesus providing? 116-269. Earlier this evening Jesus taught his apostles a lesson in humility by washing their feet. Now, apparently after the Passover meal, he quotes David's prophetic words. "The man at peace with me, one whom I trusted, who was eating my bread, has lifted his heel against me." Then he explains, "One of you will betray me." Psalm 41:9. John 13:18-21. The apostles look at one another, and each asks, "Lord, it is not I, is it?" Even Judas Iscariot does so. Peter urges John, who is next to Jesus at the table, to find out who it is. So John leans close to Jesus and asks, "Lord, who is it?" Matthew 26:22. John 13:25. Jesus answers, "It is the one to whom I will give the piece of bread that I dip." Dipping some bread in a dish on the table, Jesus hands it to Judas, saying, The Son of Man is